In the crowded, sunlit streets of Riverview, voices rose and fell in a constant cacophony. Shopkeepers yelled out the day's bargains, buskers sang for coins, and townsfolk debated politics, weather, and gossip with equal fervor. Marcus moved through it all like a swimmer against a relentless tide. His thoughts, once vibrant and full of possibility, now felt dulled, drowned out by the endless noise around him. Marcus had always dreamed of becoming a filmmaker. Since he was young, he'd imagined crafting stories that could move people, inspire them, maybe even change their lives. He would sit for hours at the local cinema, absorbing every detail of the films on screen, the light and shadows, the way characters' emotions unfolded through a single glance, the subtlety of a well-timed cut. To Marcus, storytelling through film felt like his life's purpose, but Riverview was not a town that understood grand dreams. It was a place of tradition, practicality, and safe choices. When Marcus shared his vision of directing movies one day, the responses were polite but firm. "That's a fine hobby, but you'll need a real job, Marcus," said Mrs. Plim, the town librarian, while checking out his stack of borrowed screenwriting books. "Something reliable. Movies are made in Hollywood, not Riverview," his uncle had scoffed during a family dinner. "And you've never even been to California." Even his friends didn't seem to take him seriously. They'd listen for a moment, then change the subject, laughing about the latest town gossip or teasing him about his big dreams. Over time, their lack of interest made Marcus question his own ambitions. Was he chasing something impossible? Was he simply being naive? He began to feel trapped between his inner calling and the external voices telling him to let it go. His solution was to talk louder, to try to convince everyone, family, friends, even himself, that he was serious. He would bring up his ideas, constantly hoping for encouragement, but all it seemed to do was annoy those around him. As weeks turned into months, Marcus found himself caught in a cycle of frustration. He talked and talked, but his words never seemed to reach anyone's heart. In fact, the more he spoke, the more isolated he felt. His once clear dream became muddled, clouded by doubt. Then, one fateful afternoon, Marcus wandered through the marketplace after another discouraging encounter. He'd passed the baker's stall, the flower carts, and the spice vendor whose fragrances mingled with the smell of fresh bread. Amid the usual noise of the market, something unexpected caught his attention. Silence. At a corner stall, an elderly storyteller sat on a low wooden stool, surrounded by a small crowd. He spoke in a calm, steady voice, so quiet that it seemed impossible anyone could hear him. Yet everyone leaned forward, their chatter silenced. Children sat cross-legged on the cobblestones, wide-eyed and motionless. Adults stood with their arms folded, nodding faintly, listening intently. Marcus stopped and watched, intrigued. The storyteller never raised his voice. He didn't wave his arms or demand attention. He simply told his story, each word measured, each pause deliberate, and the audience hung on every syllable. For Marcus, it was a revelation. The power wasn't in how loudly the storyteller spoke. It was in the strength of his story, the confidence with which he delivered it. Marcus began to realize that maybe he didn't need to shout his dreams from the rooftops or prove himself to everyone he met. Maybe the key wasn't in making noise, but in finding a deeper sense of conviction, one so strong that it didn't need to be announced at all. As he walked away from the market that day, Marcus carried a new seed of understanding. Perhaps he'd been going about it all wrong. Perhaps what he needed was not to convince the world, but to start listening to others, listening to himself, and letting the quiet certainty within him grow. After the encounter with the storyteller, Marcus began to approach his days differently. Rather than spending all his energy trying to explain his dreams to others, he decided to focus on learning. He reasoned that if he stayed quiet and observed, he might pick up the insights and skills he needed to truly grow as a filmmaker. So he stepped back from the noise and started listening, not just to words, but to the world around him. In Riverview's tiny library, Marcus found a wealth of film books and biographies of great directors. He read about their humble beginnings, their struggles, and the lessons they learned along the way. He pored over books on storytelling structure, camera techniques, and editing theory. With each chapter, he felt his understanding deepen. The more he learned, the less he needed to explain his passion to others. It was enough to immerse himself in it. When he wasn't reading, Marcus ventured into the local art scene. Riverview didn't have a film school or a bustling studio system, but it did have a small community theater. They put on modest productions, often with homemade sets and volunteers who wore multiple hats. Marcus signed up to help out backstage, where he ran lights, painted scenery, and quietly observed how the director and actors brought a story to life on stage. Though it wasn't filmmaking, Marcus learned valuable lessons about storytelling, collaboration, and pacing. He saw how the tiniest change in lighting could shift the mood of a scene, and how an actor's subtle gesture could say more than a line of dialogue. He never spoke about his ultimate dream of directing films, but he didn't need to. The experiences and knowledge he gained backstage were enough. Each rehearsal was a reminder that storytelling wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about creating a world others could believe in. Outside the theater, Marcus began to notice things he'd overlooked before. He spent quiet evenings by the river, watching how the light changed as the sun set, how shadows stretched and softened. He walked through the market without headphones, listening to the rhythm of life, the way a vendor called out to customers, the way a child's laughter cut through the drone of conversation. All of these details became part of a mental library that Marcus would one day draw upon when crafting scenes for his films. Surprisingly, as Marcus stopped focusing on making others believe in him, people began to notice a change in him. He spoke less but contributed more. He became the person others turned to when they needed a calm presence. Even his friends, who once brushed off his ambitions, started to ask for his opinions on creative projects. They could sense his growing confidence, even if he never said a word about it. This shift marked a turning point. Marcus realized that by truly listening, he was not only learning, but also earning the respect of those around him. He no longer felt the need to announce his goals. His passion became something he quietly nurtured, something that felt more genuine and secure. It was in that silence that he found the clarity to shape his path forward. Weeks turned into months as Marcus's new approach took hold. He had grown comfortable with the quiet process of learning and observing. Without feeling the need to shout about his dreams, he let his actions, and more importantly, his work speak for itself. One day, an opportunity presented itself that tested everything he had come to understand. The Riverview Arts Council announced a short film competition, encouraging local creators to submit 5-minute projects that told a meaningful story. The winner would receive a grant and mentorship to create a longer film. For Marcus, this was the chance he had been waiting for, an opportunity to share his vision not through explanation or persuasion, but through the very thing he had been preparing for all along, the art of storytelling. Quietly, without telling anyone, Marcus began writing. He drew inspiration from his long walks by the river, the subtle light shifts he had studied, and the moments of human connection he had witnessed in the market and at the theater. The story he created was deeply personal, reflecting his own struggles with self-doubt and the journey toward inner confidence. When his script was ready, he spent long evenings filming, often with only himself behind the camera and a few trusted friends, actors who believed in him not because of loud promises, but because they'd seen his growing skill and dedication. Marcus directed each shot with care, finding the angles and lighting that conveyed his emotions without a single word of dialogue. The entire process was silent, focused, deliberate. When the competition deadline arrived, Marcus submitted his film and said nothing about it to anyone. He didn't tell his family or friends that he had entered. Instead, he let his work enter the world on its own terms, trusting it to speak for him. On the night of the screening, Marcus sat in the back row of the community theater, his hands folded in his lap, watching the other entries with quiet admiration. When it came time for his film to be shown, he felt a calm resolve settle over him. There was nothing more he could say. His story would either resonate or it wouldn't. As the first scene unfolded, the audience leaned in. They watched the delicate play of light on the river's surface, the expression of the protagonist as he wrestled with his own fears, and the small but powerful moments of triumph. When the credits rolled, a hush filled the room. Then, the applause began soft at first, then growing. People turned to one another, nodding, whispering about the artistry and emotion they had just witnessed. Marcus didn't move. He sat still, letting the reaction wash over him. When his name was called as the winner, he stood and walked to the stage, his heart steady. The audience's applause grew louder, but Marcus stayed silent for a moment. He looked out over the crowd and simply said, "Thank you." That was all. He had learned that a single sincere word, spoken from a place of truth, carried more weight than 1,000 empty proclamations. His silence had become his strength, allowing his work to speak volumes without needing him to shout. From that day forward, Marcus's quiet confidence became his signature. People remembered his film not because he had announced it to the world, but because it had arrived, unassuming yet powerful, and left an undeniable mark. After his victory in the short film competition, the trajectory of Marcus's life began to shift. Producers and artists from neighboring towns reached out to him, impressed by his ability to tell a story so effectively without shouting for attention. Mentors offered to help him refine his craft, and invitations came in to screen his film at other festivals. Marcus was suddenly in demand, but not because he'd forced himself into the spotlight. His work had drawn the world to him, just as he had hoped. Despite the growing interest, Marcus stayed true to the approach that had brought him success. He focused on listening, observing, and quietly honing his skills. His first opportunity to make a longer film arrived when one of the festival judges offered to fund the project. Marcus accepted without hesitation, and once again, he let the process guide him. He spent months crafting a script, quietly gathering a cast, and filming in simple, natural locations that reflected the authenticity of his story. When the film premiered, it wasn't accompanied by a huge marketing campaign or flashy announcements. Instead, it was quietly released to a select audience, and yet word spread. People who saw it spoke about it to their friends, who then told others. Soon, Marcus's name began to circulate beyond Riverview and its neighboring towns. Without ever raising his voice, he found himself stepping into the world he had always dreamed of. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that his success wasn't built on hype or noise, but on the strength of his work and the integrity of his vision. He continued to read, listen, and learn from those around him, treating every project as an opportunity to deepen his craft. In interviews, when he agreed to do them, he spoke softly and candidly about his journey. He didn't inflate his achievements, nor did he downplay them. He simply shared the lessons he had learned, the importance of patience, the value of authenticity, and the power of staying silent long enough to truly understand yourself and your craft. As the years passed, Marcus's reputation grew. He went on to direct feature films, each more ambitious than the last. He collaborated with renowned actors, garnered awards, and earned critical acclaim. But he never forgot the lesson he'd learned that day in the marketplace. That's staying. Silent doesn't mean doing nothing. It means cultivating your inner strength, trusting in your abilities, and allowing your work to speak for you. When he returned to Riverview to visit family or attend local events, he walked the same market. Streets greeted by smiles and handshakes from people who now spoke of him with pride. They remembered the young man who had once tried so hard to prove himself, and they marveled at how far he'd come, not by shouting louder, but by embracing the quiet power within. Marcus's story became a source of inspiration for others. Aspiring artists from all over wrote to him, asking for advice, and he always gave the same answer: focus on the work. Find your voice through action, not noise. Stay patient, stay humble, and let everything come to you naturally. And in The end. Everything did.